I think this would be the best moment now to open it up to the audience so that we can get to also hear your reflections and your thoughts on what this wonderful panel has put together. Please, if you do have a comment or a question, you can direct it to the specific person to whom you'd like them to say something or respond to, and then we'll take this. We have about 15, 20 minutes before we wrap up the session. So, we have a lady there, there's two here. Oh wow, hang on. I'm going to take about 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll start this way. Yeah, please.
Thanks, comrades and colleagues. My name is Siviwe Mhlana. I'm a labor and development economist from South Africa. I'm actually standing up now. I think I believe it was Prof. Beckles who said it was a day of provocation. So I've also been provoked. In particular, I think earlier on by my sister and comrade Martha and comrade Molly, and now again by this panel this afternoon. I just wanted to appreciate, one, the centering of workers and women in this discussion. I think often we have different panels and conferences to discuss issues of workers, and I appreciate the fact that this panel in particular has drawn the importance of reflecting those intersections. I think it was Comrade Molly who was speaking about the experiences of workers, and I believe this is about the bread and butter politics of debt and taxation. And what I wanted to highlight here, and particularly from the work that I have done on the continent and in the Global South more generally with informal workers, to show that beyond just the kind of the experiences of the kind of industries that are promoted in this conversation about debt sustainability, but given the context of our continent where a large percentage of workers are informal, there's another conversation here that ties into, I think, the reflections that Unombuso in particular has been drawing to, and to say that at least in the context of Ghana, I think about 89% of workers are in the informal sector. And when we come out of a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, where governments were taking up more debt, in this recovery period, it's being encouraged to increase revenues. And the people that are impacted by this the most are, again, the workers, the communities, and households. And in the context of informal workers, when we even think about the recommendations for increasing revenues through taxation, these aren't necessarily in the ways that we kind of typically understand them in kind of income taxes and direct taxes, but in having to think about how we understand these problems beyond that. And we've done a lot of work with WIGO around seeing taxes as fees and payments as well, reflecting how these workers who are both not benefiting from social benefits and social protections are also having to subsidize this kind of debt crisis that we're talking about. Just my second comment very briefly, I did want to challenge the last point here about calculations. I mentioned that I am an economist, but I do think that in terms of the kind of calculations that we're pushing for, we do need to challenge what kind of orthodox economies even allows us to calculate. Even when we're talking about issues of class, which workers are counted, what type of work is counted. And oftentimes the work of women, the work of households, the work of the informal sector is not going to be reflected in that. And maybe in rethinking our measurements as well, we also need to consider the types of calculations that will reflect the history of domination and oppression and exploitation that is continuing in this time. And I think Nombuso has pointed to some frameworks and a lens for understanding the problem, but also in developing an alternative and a counter narrative. I think the feminists have a lot to say about that too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Anthony, then Professor João.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate the very rich conversation that we are having. And allow me to just speak from where she left about shaping narratives so as to achieve our intended goal. And as you were sharing, one of the thoughts that came to me was I did my master's on international relations, and my thesis was just trying to interrogate the whole conversation around the possibility of having a regional integration policy for Africa. And my case study was centered around the sale of second-hand clothing within Africa. And it was born from a decision that was taken by the AU, a collective decision to literally ban the sale of second-hand clothing within the continent of Africa so as to allow the textile industry within Africa to grow. But then I think it was only Rwanda by that time that was brave enough to implement that resolution by the African Union. So the question that begged was, why is it that many African countries, particularly the political actors, are not as bold enough to literally enforce some of the collective decisions that they make as a continent? And I think that is fundamental because in the absence of political goodwill, in the absence of proper legislative framework, as Honorable Vuyo had pointed out in the morning, because some of these factors were introduced through the legislative processes. So how do we leverage on our existing opportunities to foster a new culture that is built on, African conviction that we have capacity to actually engage in this, and not just engage by word of mouth or lamentation, but from a point of action, because I think that is the missing link. And we have opportunities, but we don't have the requisite political will for our leadership to either embark towards enforcing decisions that they collectively take as a continent. And it's very actually symbolic that we're in Accra, Ghana, the space where Ubuntu and Pan-Africanism was birthed. So I think the question to the panel is, how do we leverage, especially on the energy of that we've seen with the Gen Zs, the energy that we are seeing with the young parliamentarians, to foster the narrative she's talking about, so that even those who oppress the Africans will not perceive us as lamentators, because they love it. I've attended forums, global forums, and you'd see they enjoy it when Africans are lamenting and complaining about our problems. But when we provide a proactive solution, don't you feel like that would actually give us a new energy that is required? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anthony. Professor João.
Então, quero agradecer primeiro aos painelistas. Os temas são todos bons. Tenho a felicidade do meu colega que está aqui na mesa ter dito algumas coisas que eu quero falar. Ele adiantou algumas coisas. Estou feliz por isso. Mas eu quero acrescentar, quando ele fala da falta de vontade política, é uma das coisas que eu queria... A minha pergunta é simples para qualquer um de vós. Tudo que nós estamos a falar é útil, tudo que nós estamos a dizer é necessário fazer, reconhecemos o nosso estágio, sabemos muito bem o que é necessário fazer, sabemos o que é que nos perturba, que nos torna cada vez pobres, gerações e gerações. Mas então, o que é que devemos fazer? Qual a recomendação que devemos fazer, tirar daqui e que vai funcionar? Não uma recomendação que vai ficar no gabinete, no papel, depois voltamos a um outro AFECOD, uma outra reunião africana, mas uma resolução, uma decisão, uma orientação que vai ter eco e que crie desejo de se realizar. Porque, vejamos, como eu disse, meu colega disse, os líderes, muitos deles em África, se não quase todos, não têm vontade política de sair daqui. E eu acrescento, eles, mesmo aqueles que quando estão para entrar no poder, falam em nome de todos nós, até demonstram algumas evidências de querer trabalhar. Quando chegam ao poder, imediatamente mudam. E nós notamos isso. Então, o que é que faz com que... O que é que acontece lá no poder para as pessoas... os líderes africanos mudem? Porque os líderes dos outros continentes tentam fazer o que eles prometem. Nós vemos isso. Quando ele faz a campanha, chega ao poder, tenta fazer. Pode não conseguir tudo, mas tenta fazer visível e praticamente o que ele promete. Mas os líderes africanos não. Chegam ao poder, parece que há uma abelha que lhes morde e muda de pensamento. Então, o que é que nós devemos fazer para que eles façam o que prometem, que é aquilo que nós queremos que eles sabem? Obrigado.
My name is Penny Sankomo. I'm a feminist economist from South Africa. I also chair the board of Oxfam South Africa. So ndicela ukubuza ukuba njengoba sithetha apha ngezinto ezisafektayo ezisuka ngaphandle, zithini izinto thina ezenzayo? Sakwenza umzekelo. Apha amazwe ase-Afrika awakwazi ukutrader together ngokuba izitandards abazisetileyo zehlukene. Uba kufuneka uthenge itumato yase-South Africa, awukwazi uhamba uyoyithengisa eZimbabwe kuba awukwazi uthatha itumato yaseZimbabwe uyoyithengisa eTanzania kuba bazawuthi izitandards zethu azifani. So ingaba ayikho nale nto kuthiwa nathi senze le nto kuthiwa i-internalized oppression amongst ourselves?
Thanks. She's saying she appreciates that we are concentrating on external systems of oppression, but we have own internal systems of oppression which we have allowed. And she made the example of trade. Like, I can't take a tomato from South Africa and bring it into Tanzania. They will tell you no. I mean, if you travel frequently, you get stopped at the airports. You don't take agricultural produce across. And then she says when she has argued against it, she was told, no, because the agricultural standards of your country are not the same as ours. So her question is, haven't we imposed our own internal systems of oppression before we even come to the external ones? I mean, I know I can't carry my herb across the borders, but people can carry cigarettes. They can travel with their cigarettes. I can't carry marijuana because it is demonized. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Two quick ones. Africa with Christian aid. One to Jane. In terms of sustaining the colonial machinery, Africa is witnessing a number of pans. Pan-European, Pan-American, Pan-Chinese, Pan-Japanese African projects in terms of summits, TCAD, FOCAC, EU-Africa Summit. In light of the extension of the reparative theme by the African Union for the next 10 years, do you believe that the current ecosystem where we are having Africa traveling to countries to discuss programs on Africa, and Africa not having its own summit on Africa, do you think the current system is viable and capable of addressing the challenges that are facing us in terms of reparative justice? And lastly, to my brother, in the question of identity, I believe Africa, not me, has like a curse where we are divided into Lusophone, Francophone, Anglophone. I hear also people talking about Arabophone. And we proudly own it. My question to you, do you think in terms of constructing the identity, what kind of pushbacks do you foresee in terms of using identity as a tool of rebuilding better and building backwards to achieve reparative justice in every aspect of the economy? I thank you.
Merci. Je tiens à remercier les organisateurs et je voudrais surtout exhorter Aphrodite et ses partenaires à saisir l'occasion qui nous est donnée en cette belle terre de Kwame Nkrumah pour vraiment poser les bases d'un réseau de différents membres qui peut être créé ici de par les qualités et les résultats positifs du Ghana et son gouvernement actuel qui a des résultats en termes de panafricanisme que nous connaissons très avancés. Je pense aussi que nous avons les ressources humaines nécessaires dans cette salle pour avancer vers cela. Donc, c'est là mon exhortation. Et aussi, les régions de l'Afrique qui sont les régions de l'Afrique qui sont du côté sahélien, qui sont en train de changer la donne actuellement. Je ne sais pas si nous avons des membres de ces différents pays dans cette salle. Et surtout le Burkina Faso, s'il y en a, nous prierons des gens de nous donner leur point de vue sur les avancées qu'ils ont eues dernièrement. Merci.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for those very good questions. Some are directly pointed to colleagues on the panel. So perhaps what I'll do is I'll start with Briggs and we'll come this way as we also give your closing remarks. And if we can be as brief as possible, because I know we have one more panel before we close, and so it has been quite a long day for all of us. So Briggs.
Thanks, Jason. So the question of calculations, I think the point I sought to make by quoting Frantz Fanon on how Europe underdeveloped Africa is actually that the loss or what we are owed as a continent is incalculable, because it's a loss of what existed before. It's a loss of your organic path to development. It's a loss of your most productive youth. It's the loss arising from the imposition of a colonial order, which meant taxation systems, which meant the economy we currently have today, where you consume what you do not produce, and you produce what you do not consume. And you don't make anything from what you're producing in the form of the primary commodities, whatever we're exporting, from agriculture, from mining. And the continuation of that in what has been called the neo-colonial dispensational order today. So I'm merely saying it's actually incalculable, and that's probably why there's such a great deal of discomfort from the responsible or perpetrating countries, if you want to put it that way, to have this conversation, because how do you even begin to quantify that and to put a figure to say, then we owe you $100 billion? I think that's why we are being told to, let's just move on. Forget about the past. That's why our memory of what happened is such a huge terrain of struggle. So that's all I'm making there. We even for us, at the end of the day, if we engage this thoroughly, we are simply going to say we are giving you a discounted figure. And that figure says, let's solve infrastructure needs in Ghana, let's solve education needs, let's solve healthcare needs, and it costs this much money. In fact, if you take Walter Redney further, he even says it's a loss of the future that we had. So how do you calculate that? So at the end of the day, it's truly a discounted figure that we are talking about. Then coming to, again, connecting to the point I made earlier, to say it's a moment where brute force or raw power is decisive, and less so what you can call peripheral sensibilities or vibes around truth, justice, and all of that. I think we really need to remember it's Martin Luther King who says, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It takes continuous struggle. So we really need to think about what does it mean for us to be engaged in this continuous struggle in a way that gives us power to be able to shape the outcome of this moment. So the question of African unity is absolutely decisive in this moment. I think one of the greatest shames of history is that 13 European men set in 1885 and carved out what we know to be the African continent today, its borders and everything. But an even bigger shame of history is that 54 African presidents cannot sit today and undo that. 70 years after independence. More than 1 billion African citizens cannot sit and undo what happened in 1885, even if it's this so many decades after independence. So the question of our power, how we are organizing ourselves to be these 1 billion plus citizens who are a political force, who are a power that cannot be ignored, a power that can shape the outcome of this current contestation cannot be ignored. It's absolutely fundamental. So the last thing that I would say, Jason, is that we learned when we engaged in the struggle on illicit financial flows 10 years ago, when the African Union Declaration on IFFs was coming out, President Mbeki, as the chair then, said it's more than technical solutions that we are going to need to solve this matter. Sometimes we even know what we need to do technically. It's going to take political will. And that political will can only come out of organized citizens who are building this kind of power to attain a particular outcome. So we cannot do without grassroots organizing, getting out of conference rooms like this, as we are going to do on Friday, as part of the debt rally, AFCOT debt rally, to actually bring in ordinary citizens into this conversation and build the kind of social base and political muscle that will guarantee change.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Briggs, for that.